The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got. They're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, the temptation is there to talk about last night's debates. But on a sports radio station, it's a no-win situation. So I'll just leave it at that. A little tired today. Stayed up for all of it. And, well, let's just move from there. Other things to talk about today, including sports, with Jeff Saturday with his analysis of the rookie quarterbacks and what he saw from Jayden Daniels on Sunday. He was on PTI last night. We'll play some of that. Alex Smith, I think, is emerging as a big star on ESPN. Didn't expect that because his news conferences here when he played quarterback were kind of, nothing special. But he's really, really good. He was on Dan Patrick yesterday and provided some really good insight on Jim Harbaugh, who was his coach with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, you may remember this, that in the year that the 49ers made it to the Super Bowl with Harbaugh, which I believe was 2012, Alex Smith was the starting quarterback that year. He suffered a concussion, missed a game. Colin Kaepernick took over, and it was Kaepernick who quarterbacked the 49ers to the Super Bowl. But what you'll hear from Alex Smith is someone who really admires Jim Harbaugh and actually credits him for saving his career because he was on his way out the door when Harbaugh arrived in 2011 and got him on the path where he could go to Kansas City, had a great run there, and probably would have had a good run here as well had he not suffered that gruesome broken leg, and he talks about the aftermath of that as well, and we'll get to that. We do Orioles preview every Wednesday, and we'll be joined by Katie Griggs, who is the president of business operations. Fan Appreciation Weekend is coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend, and yeah, baseball season has really moved along, and not only that, they get out of the way pretty early this year. Sometimes it finishes up like October 4th, 5th. No, they're out of the way in September, and it gets rolling in early October. And while the Orioles will be a part of that, there's some struggles that are going on. A lot of injuries to talk about. They did win last night and are now just a half game behind the Yankees. But these are not the same Orioles that finished up last season and won 103 games. It is September 11th, and it's you look at it going further and further into the distance. We're now 23 years removed from that just awful day. And I was thinking about my niece who was born less than a month before 9/11. She graduated from college last year, over a year ago. And I look at young people who are in their 20s and would have no recollection of this. But in my mind, it's a day that, of course, I'll never forget, nor will just about anybody who was alive that day. And I've told this story before, but it is the day to tell it. And it was a day almost exactly weather-wise like this. It was a Tuesday, not a Wednesday. And I was doing a show with Tony Kornheiser at what they called the ESPN Zone at 11th and E, right downtown. And it was a pretty normal day for me. I took the Metro in and walked to the studio. And I walked into the studio, and the man who was engineering the show had the televisions on. We had TV sets in the studio, and he was fixed on what was going on. And I said, what's happening here? And he said, a plane just went into the Twin Towers in New York. And at the time, they were thinking, oh, this is just an accident, a plane going off course. But while we're watching, the second plane hits, and now we know we got a terrorist situation. And it gets more and more scary. We watch all the news coverage unfold. At one point, one of the towers goes down, then the other. And then, because we are at 11th and E downtown, we hear what sounds like a really loud noise, but not an unusual kind of noise. Well, it turned out that was the plane hitting the Pentagon. And we were really just blocks away from the White House, 11th and E, so we were pretty much 5 blocks away. And had that plane, which went down in Pennsylvania, not gone down there, that plane would have hit the White House, and God knows, what would have happened to us. And it was, as awful as anything I could remember. We didn't really know what to do. And we had a national radio show on ESPN, hosted the Tony Kornheiser Show. and the instructions from Bristol were to go ahead and start the show. So Tony begins the show, and he's, of course, talking about what's going on in New York and what we know so far. Just before we went on, just before, I think it was a 10 o'clock show, so it was just before 10 o'clock, Jim Miklaszewski had gone on the Today Show to say what had happened at the Pentagon. They were just reports at that time, but he said there were reports that the plane had gone into the Pentagon, so we throw that in as well. And the show continues for about 10 minutes, and then the manager of the ESPN Zone, which, if you don't remember, was a souped-up sports bar. It was a very big piece of real estate with higher-end food, I guess, rather than just the burgers and pizza and that kind of stuff. And it was something that ESPN was trying to spread its brand at that time. And so the manager of the restaurant came into the studio and said, "We've been told we have to evacuate." So we left the studio. Tony was just, 5 blocks away from the Washington Post, where he had an office at the time. And I didn't know how I was going to get back to Rockville because I had assumed that the subways were going to be shut down. And Tony said, "Well, why don't you come with me over to the Post and we can wait to see what happens?" So walk over to the Post, and rightfully so, they told us, no, nobody who is not an employee of the Post can enter the building, which I fully understood. So Tony went in, and I then went to try and figure out how to get back to Rockville without the metro. And I was thinking, maybe I can get a ride. It's too far to walk, but somehow or another, I'm going to get back there. And I start walking up, I guess it was Connecticut Avenue, and I saw a couple of guys get out of a car. And I asked them, were they listening to the radio? And they said yes. And I said, did you hear anything about the metro being shut down? And they said no. As a matter of fact, I went in and the metro was running, and I got back. But in walking to the metro, this is what will always stick with me from that day. All the offices downtown were evacuated, government workers walking around. And it wasn't really a sense of panic. It wasn't, of course, New York City, where you could look up and see the destruction and dust everywhere and all the horrible, horrible things and people jumping out of windows to avoid being burned to death. I mean, it was just as a horrible thing as you can imagine. But in Washington, it's people walking around kind of, I guess, stupefied. But nobody was I didn't see anybody crying. I'm sure there were people that were doing that. But the reaction just really stunned me about how just it numbed everyone, right? I mean, that's, if you're around, you kind of remember that. But I did get back to Rockville and was told that the station, the sports station then, was going to run ABC News for the rest of the day. And, this is how I felt at the time. And maybe it was an overreaction, but there was just so much that we didn't know at that time. And I thought, wow, this is going to change my life dramatically. We're now in under attack from a foreign nation. There's going to be retaliation on this, and who knows what the United States is going to look like. I mean, maybe it sounds silly in retrospect, but I was thinking, I have a job talking about sports on the radio. This is not necessary in the culture. And, what happens to me? What do I do now to help what is going to be a massive situation in the United States? As it turned out, things returned to semi-normal in the upcoming days and weeks. If you were flying, of course, flying was shut down for an entire week. And then the NFL games were postponed. That was a big hot button as people were debating, well, should the NFL play or should they not? It became moot at one point because they said, well, the teams can't fly to destinations anyway, so there's no way we can play games. And it was just a period of time where you just didn't know. It was just crazy. And I remember that about a month later, no, not a month later, it was much later because the Super Bowl had to be postponed. They managed to reconfigure the NFL schedule so they could get 16 games in, and they moved the Super Bowl up a week, and it was in New Orleans. And I remember waking up that morning to go to the Superdome for the game, and as I was approaching, I saw a ring of tanks around the Superdome. I will never forget that. The image of that was just jarring. And I had my credentials and everything else, identification. There was they patted me down. They did as much security for any event that I can ever remember. And they told us to get there early, so I was probably there 3 or 4 hours before the game, maybe even more than that, and got in and saw the game. And if you look at the last 23 years, I don't want to say it's a miracle, but the expectation was, and that's why those ring of tanks were there, that at some point there was going to be another attack. And, we eventually did get bin Laden many years later. But I just think of today and think of the things that I went through on this day in 2001 and how it sticks with me. And now generations of people, my kids are in their 30s, so they remember being sent home from school. But there are adults now, some even with families, who have zero recollection of this day. None whatsoever, as it gets further and further in the distance. But for those of us who lived through it, it's something that, really shaped us in many ways, shaped our thinking about these things that we thought would never be possible. I mean, we grew up learning about the attack on Pearl Harbor, but that was something that happened many, many years before I was born, and it was part of the war that was going on at the time, and we were involved in. It never would have occurred to me that something like that could happen on U.S. soil and happen with the plane hitting the Pentagon so close to where I was. And I just thought I'd share that. I mean, you may have similar recollections or you may be too young to remember that, but that was mine from this day in 2001. All right, let's move on to much lighter things, and that is the development of the young quarterbacks. And will Jayden Daniels become one of those guys? I would say for the opening act, you might give it a B plus. He ran probably a lot more than anybody would like, including his coach. Didn't throw any interceptions, didn't turn the ball over, may have taken a couple of hits that he shouldn't have taken, but I would say so far, so pretty good. Jeff Saturday was on last night on PTI, and they asked him about the Daniels debut and also the debut of the other young quarterbacks.
And his coach, Dan Quinn, said, and I quote, "We'd love to see him remain a passer first." Jeff, is this a sentiment you would echo as a lineman?
Oh, sometimes. I'll say this. It's one thing if he's like running around and it's very ineffective. He was fairly effective with his legs the other day, right? I mean, he's churning out yards. He's trying to convert first downs. And when you drop back, if you don't see it and you're not processing it well, or you're not processing what defense are doing, I do think when you're as athletic as he is, show what you have and kind of do it as long as you're protecting yourself. I thought he did a good job. I didn't see him take a whole bunch of like unnecessary shots. He doesn't slide well, but he kind of dives to make sure he doesn't get hit, which I'm a fan of. I understand what coaches are saying. They do want you to stay in the pocket. They want, but like I look at Anthony Richardson, and this guy, he last year he gets hurt, has to come out. He has some spectacular plays on Sunday against the Texans, but he ran one in from the 5. And listen, as an offensive lineman, you're awfully glad when that dude scores 6 for your team. So it's kind of a love-hate, and I'm not writing off all of what Daniels did. I understand what Dan Quinn's saying, but for an offensive line, production matters as well.
Sliding matters. Kids don't play enough baseball. They don't know how to slide anymore, which is ridiculous.
That's true.
Passing yards and touchdowns were way down in week 1, Jeff. I think it's the lack of teams' interest in actually doing something in the preseason. Regardless, is that hurting the product overall, the fact that these first couple of weeks seem like preseason at best?
Yeah, probably. I mean, even when I was playing, your first 4 to 5 weeks, you didn't really know who you were as a team, right? You're kind of developing. I would think, though, part of it is the youth of the quarterback position as a whole, right? You're seeing a lot of guys drafted and play right away, whereas when I was playing, guys would kind of sit the bench for a little bit or not have to start right away, or when they did start, it may be ugly, but it might be great. I think right now we're just kind of going through a phase in the NFL. We got a lot of young QBs. They are not seeing the game. And here's the other part, and Will, you and I both know this. Defenses are ahead of offenses early in the season no matter what, right? They can put a lot more in. They can get a lot more complicated than you can offensively. And so it takes a few weeks to catch up. And so I think that's probably a product of it as well, because you're doing less in preseason. And so when you do hit that season, those defenses now have a 4 to 6 week stretch instead of just 4 as back when I was playing.
We will get you out of here on this. You mentioned young quarterbacks. Bryce Young still qualifies as a young quarterback.
Yeah.
Second year, bad again for the Panthers. Bad again. Fans are antsy, understandably. How long does a number 1 overall quarterback pick have until his teammates start getting antsy as well?
Not very long, Tony. And I'll be honest with you. Part of this is because of the pressure that, when you see young quarterbacks ascend so quickly. Think of Stroud. I mean, think about what Anthony Richardson did the other day when those two played each other, and he's chucking, 60-yard bombs in the air, and you're seeing these BBs get thrown, and these guys, playing a game like that. When you see success from young quarterbacks in your class, and they are playing up to what everybody expected you to do, and you're not, I think, I think that's when other players start to take notice. They're going to say everything right. They're going to develop him, do the things they can. But look, you're not blind as a player. You're seeing the same highlights everybody else is seeing when you go home. Your family's saying the same things to you that we all say as fans to each other. So to block it all out is not the truth. But you're going to ride with the guy because that's your job. And until they decide to move on, that's the guy you got to go block for.
That's Jeff Saturday, who blocked for Peyton Manning for a good part of his career, including the part where Manning got off to the slow start with 28 interceptions and the growing pains that go along with a young quarterback. I wonder about this, and with Saturday saying that defenses are ahead of offenses at this point. It's 17 games now. We know sooner rather than later it's going to go to 18 and eventually 20. There's no way around this. There's just too much money that the NFL can pocket from this. When the number of games goes up, are they going to start to treat the early part of the regular season like the preseason? And especially if you have a rookie quarterback, what's the point of rolling him out in week 1 when you have a 20-game season? You want to see what he's doing at the end of the year. So these days now of starting rookie quarterbacks right away, they may be coming to an end too, because it's just not going to make sense. It's just too long of a season. It's too long of a season now. They never should have gone to 17 games. They shouldn't go to 18. They certainly shouldn't go to 20, but they will. That's financial sense for the NFL. They just can't stop the money train, and players' careers will be shorter, sure, but they'll make more money. And that's how this is all going to be done. They're going to say to the Players Association, I know you don't want 18 games, but if you don't like it, we'll lock you out, or we'll give you another $1 billion. Oh, thank you. We'll take another $1 billion. That's the way it's going to work. So, as we've watched these quarterbacks still developing, as good as they may become, Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, Bo Nix, and anybody else that's young and developing, it's too long of a season. Preseason is becoming more and more meaningless. I mean, look, I guess Caleb Williams played a little bit more than Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels played 3 series in the preseason. 3 series. That's it. So what you saw on Sunday is partly a result of that he just hasn't had enough experience playing against ones. Ones versus ones, a lot different than what he saw in those 3 series in the preseason. Coming up, Jim Harbaugh. He's a character. He was on yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. We'll get to some of his thoughts. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
And just over an hour, Orioles preview as the Birds won last night. They pull within a half game of the Yankees coming down the stretch. 16 games to go in the season. It's looking like a really good race, although there have been opportunities for both teams to seize control, and neither one has done it. So we'll take a further look at that coming up at 10:30. Meantime, the NFL back in session, and Jim Harbaugh back in the league. And whatever you want to say about Harbaugh, he's a little wacky, but he can coach. I mean, he has won in both college football and the NFL. He didn't win a Super Bowl in the NFL. He did win a national championship in college, and probably got out the door just in time because, it would have been a mess had he stayed with all the recruiting violations. So, he got out while the going was good, and he won his national championship. So nobody in Michigan is going to hate him. He leaves behind the title that was seemingly promised when he came in after being fired by the 49ers. But you could probably guess that he's back in the NFL because it just wasn't feasible to be in college. But he's the kind of guy that likes to tell you these wacky anecdotes and uses strange quotes. And so this was the analogy that he used in talking to Dan Patrick yesterday about coming back to coach in the NFL for the Chargers.
It's like the Field of Dreams movie. Remember when Burt Lancaster, was talking about his playing days, and he said he walked off that field thinking there would be other days, but there were no other days. And I walked off that Super Bowl field in New Orleans thinking there'll be another day. There'll be another day. You don't know if there is going to be another day. So to have that opportunity to be back in position, to be in position, I'm sure going to attack it with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind.
Yeah, that's another one that he got from his dad. But the main one that he got from his father, and you've heard it a million times, who's got it better than us? Nobody. And yesterday, Harbaugh discussed the origin of that with Dan Patrick.
It's just a way of looking at something, right? I mean, who's got it better than us? Nobody. That's a perspective. And then it also has the layer of, there's of ankle weights of, sometimes you don't think you have it good or somebody else has got it better, but it's actually the thing that's making you overcome something that makes you better. For example, I grew up, as a kid wanting to be a major league shortstop, until probably the time I was 17 years old. I was destined and born to be, but it turned out that there was kids in the Dominican Republic who had it a lot better than I did. They didn't have a field. Their ball glove was a milk carton. So there was a lot of bad hops. Turned out that they had it better than I did because I had a glove and I had a decent field. And then it's the thing that I really say, and my dad said to us as a family, and I thought what he was really saying when he said, who's got it better than us, Jim and John, he was really telling us that, he was the lucky one to have, to be a dad and have these, this family. And when we said nobody back, then what we were really saying was, we loved it. We love being in this family. So it's carried on, from one generation to the next. And when I say it about I say it to my two great loves, my family at home and my family at work. There's no coach that could have it better than be coaching, this in this organization with these players and these coaches. And when I say it to my kids, I say it the same way. Like, I'm the luckiest dad there is.
Tell me about, you gave each of your players a work shirt with their name, the patch, the lightning bolt logo on there. So something an auto mechanic might wear. Why? Yeah. Do you have the shirt there?
Oh, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Got my blue collar shirt right here.
So it is blue collar. Or a gas station guy might wear something like that, old school.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. Obviously it's a motivational shirt. It's it honors work, and that's the first layer of that. And the second layer, for me and really everybody is I'm honoring the people in my life that did the dirty work, and everybody's got it. You've got it. I've got it. Some people goes back one generation to their parents, or it goes back to their grandparents, maybe their great grandparents, not very often, but there's somebody in your family, Dan, I know that, did a job that they didn't love to do, but they did it to put a roof over the family's head. And in my case, that's my two grandparents, Joe Sapiti, that's my mom's dad. And in fact, he went to work. He's had a full-time job since he was in the sixth grade. He had to leave the sixth grade and go work for his family. Came over from Italy when he was 4 years old, and in fact, he worked in a filling station. That was his job. And then he became a self-taught mechanic. And before he was done. He got so good at being a mechanic that he was teaching mechanics at Cleveland Trade School, and he wore a shirt like this, just exactly like this. I remember growing up, and it said Joe on it. And my dad's dad, Bill Harbaugh, he was a brakeman on a train, and he wore the same kind of shirt, and it said Bill. And he became an engineer. But the bottom line was he got my dad and his kids to college. My dad went to Bowling Green State University. My mother, Jackie, also went to Bowling Green State University. That's where they met. My dad played football, and my mom was a cheerleader. Both became educators after college. And as Michelle Obama says, I mean, the closest guarantee you have to success in life is education. I believe that, but and that's what allowed my mom and dad to do a job they loved. My dad became a coach, and then But I look back and I honor Joe Sapiti and Bill Harbaugh for doing the job, the dirty work for their family. So that's the second piece to that work shirt. Thanks for asking that. That's something very important to me and our family.
Now, that's Jim Harbaugh with Dan Patrick yesterday. Some might say, it's kind of corny, schlocky, all that. No, people buy it. I mean, his success really can't be questioned. Now, he is short-term, especially in the NFL. Like the Chargers hiring him, I don't think he's going to be there for 10 years. I think the outer limits of that are 6, maybe 5, but in that period of time, he's proven he could possibly win a Super Bowl. Remember when he took over the 49ers? This was the 2011 season, and they were a bad team. That's what happens when you hire a new coach. The team was bad. You had to bring somebody else in. And he did some odd stuff. First, they had the lockout. I remember that. So that delayed things a bit, how much you could mix with the players and that sort of thing. But once he got him out on the field, he used the game uniforms from the previous season as practice uniforms. And they had to tuck in their jerseys, and they had to conform with all the NFL uniform rules. And you might say, what does he need to do that for? He was trying to establish a culture there, and it obviously worked because in his second season, he took that team to the Super Bowl. The first year, they made it to the NFC Championship game. Clearly, they had talent to do that. And Alex Smith, and you're going to hear Alex Smith in the next hour. He was also on with Dan yesterday and told some Harbaugh stories. Alex Smith had one foot out the door. He had been, at that point, pretty much of a bust for the 49ers. Number one pick. Aaron Rodgers at that point was already established in the NFL as he'd moved on, replacing Brett Favre. And it looked like the 49ers had really blown it with Smith. And one thing led to another, and he and Harbaugh hooked up, and Harbaugh may have saved his career. He did eventually go to the Kansas City Chiefs as he got benched for Colin Kaepernick, who took the 49ers to the Super Bowl. But there's method to this madness for Harbaugh, and it seems crazy. It seems nutty. But on the other hand, it definitely works. Now, he does wear out his welcome. He first showed what kind of a coach he was when he took over a horrible Stanford team. I think Stanford had gone 1-10 before he got there. And he turned that into a program that was just on the edge of competing for a championship, and obviously could recruit, getting guys like Andrew Luck there. And but he was known as a guy who marched to the beat of his own drum. And the president of the school would make an appointment with him, and then Harbaugh wouldn't show up, and then they'd find out, oh, yeah, Jim's out recruiting. You don't stand up the president of the school, but he did that. He had established enough of a track record there that he was able to do that, and that propelled him to the NFL, where he coached the 49ers, then back to Michigan, college football, and now he's there for unfinished business, as he said, like in Field of Dreams, Moonlight Graham, who walked off the field for the last time thinking he would get another chance to get an at-bat at the major leagues and never got it. Harbaugh back for a chance to win a Super Bowl, and if you got a guy like Justin Herbert, with what he's done with quarterbacks in the past, people forget Harbaugh was not a Hall of Fame quarterback, but he was pretty darn good. Played about 15 years in the league, and really was a good quarterback. But knew he wanted to coach, and as a matter of fact, even before his playing career ended, he helped his father, who was on his way out the door at a smaller program. I forget the name of it, but he was coaching at one of those what we call now FCS schools. I think it was 1AA at the time, and they won a national championship with the players he recruited. So for whatever you want to say about Jim Harbaugh and how wacky he seems, he gets it done. That guy can coach. Short term, he can coach. Commanders now down to 1.5-point favorites against the Giants. And on the surface, you go, well, Jesus, I mean, it's really bad in New York with Daniel Jones. Look at what happened last week in that game against the Minnesota Vikings. They just got clobbered, and he was god-awful. But there's this. In 7 games against Washington, Daniel Jones has completed 70% of his passes, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Those are great numbers. You know what he did last week? He had a pick 6, sacked 5 times, pair of interceptions, and they were booing the hell out of him at MetLife Stadium. So yesterday, one of the Vikings defenders was on radio in Minnesota. His name is Jonathan Greenard, and he said it was so bad that he started to feel sorry for Daniel Jones. He was on the Power Hour on KFAN, and Greenard admitted that he started to feel bad when the boos from the Giants fans got so loud. It felt like a typical third down situation where fans are often at their loudest. That's, at home. This is on the road. He's on the road at the home stadium of Daniel Jones. He says, man, we heard the boos raining in. We're like, okay, now we're good on our end. But when it got really loud to where it was loud as it would be on third down defense, it was kind of bad. We kind of started to feel a little bit bad for him, and we're still just completely taking everything away that he wants to do. Hey, it's good to be on the other side of it. It's our job not to be on the side of it when you're not doing our job. And he didn't really have much of a game. He didn't have a tackle, but boy, they made life miserable for Daniel Jones. As a matter of fact, there were some fans that gathered outside the locker room to boo him on the way out. Now, this is a guy who's young. He has a brand new contract, and we gave this stat on Monday. Since he signed that monster contract with the Giants last season, he has thrown more touchdowns to the other team, 3 pick sixes, than touchdowns to his own team, which is 2. That is absolutely remarkable. And the fact that he's played well against Washington, that's what makes this matchup so intriguing on Sunday. Can he continue that? Now, one thing that was supposed to improve this year was the defense. The defense was last year in points allowed. And this week they give up almost 40 in the loss to Tampa. And the troubling thing so far, things can change because they're talking now about lack of communication in the secondary, and maybe they can get that better. But Joe Witt Jr. was the secondary coach in Dallas. He comes here, that's his specialty. Secondary's god-awful. We also heard during the preseason, there may be some weaknesses that we have to work through, but we got such a great push up front with these highly paid defensive linemen, that's going to make a difference in the secondary. Well, it really didn't. I mean, Baker Mayfield looked Patrick Mahomes-ish on Sunday, and he ain't that good. He's good. He's a veteran, but he's not that good. And how about this? How about the way he played and the way Deshaun Watson looked for the Cleveland Browns? And there's now new allegations of sexual harassment that and I was thinking about this. He already served an 11-game suspension for those lawsuits that were filed by the masseuse for sexual misconduct. If you're the Browns and you're on the hook for that amount of money for him, I think it's still like $180 million. I wonder if you're even rooting for the commissioner to say, oh, yeah, this is against the conduct of the league, and we're going to have to suspend you for multiple games, and the Browns won't have to pay him. That's how bad it is right now. That's how bad it is right now for the Cleveland Browns. And Jameis Winston, in case you don't know, is their backup quarterback. And, he has won some games in the past. He's played okay at times, throws a lot of interceptions. But as a starter, he hasn't been terrible, and he's got to be better than what Deshaun Watson showed on Sunday. So that's something to keep an eye on. All right, coming up, Adrian Peterson. Remember Adrian Peterson played here? Guy's broke. Really broke. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Just in case you're not familiar with our new lineup, Bram Weinstein now at 11 o'clock and Tony Kornheiser at 2 o'clock, Greeny at noon. And I'm in my usual spot here from 9 to 11. They didn't move me. And, I'm at the age now where I don't like change. So it's good. Like, I'm now settled into a townhouse. I've been there for 6 years after living in a big house for all those years when my kids were growing up. And I don't want to move again. Moving is tough. So glad to be in this spot, as I've been for a few years now. Adrian Peterson back in the news. Remember when he played here? And remember this, to his credit. When he signed with Washington in 2018, there were a lot of players, ex-players, said, "Oh, don't do it, AP. Don't do it. It'll destroy your legacy." Oh man, and Chris Carter was on TV at the time, and he said, "I made that mistake. I shouldn't have signed with Miami at the end. I shouldn't have done that. Don't do it." Well, he came here and actually played pretty well. I think he had 2 1,000-yard seasons. The reason he was doing it was he needed the money, and now it's really gotten to be a serious situation. Here's what happened. He took out a loan in March of 2017, thinking, okay, it's a $5 million loan. I'm going to make $18 million with the Vikings this year. That's going to take care of whatever issues I have. Now, the problem is that the Vikings cut him loose. He became a free agent, and the money dropped off dramatically. Prior to 2016, where he's taking the loan, he was doing well. He made a combined $25 million in 15 and 16, and then made about $3.5 million in 2017, just over $1 million in 2018, $2.5 million in 2019. Remember when Ron Rivera came here, he cut him loose. He's still hanging on, made just over $1 million in 2020 and $300,000 in 2021. Has not played in the NFL since, and I'm sure won't get back in. He's a Hall of Fame player for sure. But he's had issues over the years, and remember he was suspended for a good chunk of one season because of abuse of his child, just a horrible story. And so he's had some things that have gone wrong in his life, but he clearly had no idea how to handle money, made over $100 million. And this loan that he took out, I mean, it's like with the loan shark. He took this out in 2017, so we're a little more than 7 years after that. And the loan, which was about $5 million, has ballooned to $8.3 million. I mean, it's just a mess. So what's now happened is a Houston judge has ordered that his assets be seized, and that means his trophies, his furniture. I think you're allowed to keep your car and your house, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, it should not have happened. It's inconceivable to someone like me. I grew up with an understanding of money, but it would seem that when you get in the NFL, that you meet with a financial person, and the league has people. They have people to give you advice. You have teammates who understand how to save their money, and they help you out. And you go, look, you're making the kind of money here that if you do things right, you'll never have to worry about another dollar. You can do whatever the hell you want with the rest of your life. If you want to work someplace, fine. If you don't, you don't have to. Money will create more money. That's how it works in our system. And instead, he blew through it. I'm not sure how, but he's the highest, made more money than any other running back in the history of the game. And to now have his assets seized is remarkable. And I keep going back to conversations that I had with Brian Mitchell, who was the player rep with the Redskins when he played, a very, very shrewd guy about money. I mean, I've heard stories that he hasn't spent a dime of what he made on the playing field. It's all been things that he's done, broadcasting, other investments, deals. And he said that he would go to the players when he was the player rep. He says, hey, the league has a deal For every $10,000 you put in to this fund, they'll match it. There's not a business in America that does this. So if let's say you put in over the course of your career $300,000 of your salary, by the time you retire, that could be $600,000. You can't invest in anything like that unless you buy a bunch of Apple stock, and it works that way. And the player said, no, you're not going to take my money. And he said, don't be a fool here. But this is a common problem. They've done a lot of documentaries about it, and it's just amazing that it's reached this point with Peterson. And I would think that if he's got a decent lawyer, they'll negotiate this loan so it's not this bad. But it was a $5 million loan. And at some point, that's got to be paid back or negotiated down or something like that. But this is what the judge is doing, and they're saying now it's not just the $8.3 million judgment that's against him going back now 3 years. His debt is estimated to be $12 million, $103 million in salary, $12 million in debt. Whew. Coming up in the next hour, Orioles preview, plus Alex Smith with some really insightful stuff on the rookie quarterbacks getting to play. It's the Andy Pollard Show, ESPN 630. All right, Orioles are in a dogfight with the New York Yankees. It's now a half-game lead with the Yankees losing last night and the Orioles winning, but there has been a lot of inconsistency down the stretch, a lot of it related to injuries. The fact that the O's are hanging in there with all the injuries that they've had is somewhat remarkable, but there's a whole different feel to September of 2024 than September of 2023. And we'll take a further look at Orioles preview coming up at 10:30. Katie Griggs, who is the president of business operations for the Birds, will join us. You got Fan Appreciation Weekend coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend. And the regular season, coming to a close very quickly. Started early and wraps up and gets out of the way. It's probably a good idea. Baseball in November, how much later can you go, especially if you're going to have a cold weather team in there. We're going to have snowed out games before you know it. So good that they get it out of the way early. So some football here, and Alex Smith, who as you know, ended his career. The fact that it ended the way it did was somewhat remarkable, given the broken leg that he suffered. And if you saw the E60 report on it, just how gruesome it was, the recovery, how he almost lost his leg, for that matter, almost lost his life. And the fact that he made it back on the field to play was pretty remarkable. And he left here, the feelings weren't that great, really. Ron Rivera, and I kind of understand that. Rivera in his first year had some reservations about bringing him back. I mean, who wouldn't after seeing his leg? And he had to kind of fight to get himself into training camp. He was part of the roster, and they were still paying him, so he figured, he should play and wanted to play. Didn't want his career to end being carried off the field. And helped them to win some games, to get to 7 wins in a crazy year in that division. They won the division at 7-9, hosted a playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But in the news conferences I saw with Alex Smith, I wasn't blown away. He was cooperative, but he didn't really seem to have a lot of energy on things. And I didn't really expect him to go into broadcasting. And if he did, I didn't really think he'd be that great at it. He's good. He's really good, really insightful. He did an interview last weekend with Aaron Rodgers, and that's kind of like the old Gay Talese story on Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio, where Marilyn Monroe went to entertain the troops in Korea, and she came back, and this is when they had their brief marriage, and she said, "Oh, Joe, you can't imagine what it was like to hear all those people cheering for me." And DiMaggio said, "Yes, I can. Yes, I can." So those two, Rodgers, and they're linked because there was supposed to be a coin flip as to who would go number 1 in 2005. It wound up being Smith. Rodgers slides all the way down to 24 to the Packers. He has the Hall of Fame career. Smith does not, plays well, not well enough to be considered for that. And then both of them coming back from big-time injuries, as we saw the other night with Rodgers back on the field. But Smith was on yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show, and in light of what happened with Jayden Daniels and the other rookie quarterbacks, He was asked about the statement that Tom Brady made going into the season that it's almost a tragedy to have these players thrown into the mix so soon. This was Smith's reaction to that.
Generally speaking, I align with Tom. Like, I think if you're taking a quarterback in the first round, I think you should do everything in your power to make sure that when they take the field, like, they are ready to roll. I mean, I just think I've heard Coach Saban talk about it, and I lived it. The expectations on a first-round quarterback, it's so much. It's so heavy. The game is so different, and that it's like the worst success rate in the NFL. If you look at a position basis, like of drafting positions, the lowest hit rate in the NFL for first-round picks is quarterback. And so I generally think that, like, why not have them over-prepared? Listen, if you waited a little too long, could Patrick Mahomes have played earlier? Sure, absolutely, right? But, like, what was the fault of him waiting, almost all the season and then you hitting? Like, what's the worry about, Jordan Love waiting a couple of years? The important thing is to hit on it. And I think you're making such a big investment in these guys. I think you want to, again, ensure that they have the best chance to succeed. With that all being said, Dan, I completely agree with you. This year's class is an exception to the rule.
True.
I mean, these guys have played more football and are more prepared as a class that I can ever remember. I mean, Bo Nix has literally played more football than college football than anybody. Jayden Daniels, 5-year starter. I mean, these guys are very, very accomplished. Even Caleb Williams, like, listen, we've known he's going to be the number one pick for a couple years now. I mean, this guy's been dealing with expectations since high school. He's played college football at the highest level. Even he's I think, really well prepared for this. And I don't think we can judge this off of 1 week, right? I mean, it's the opening week. This game's a blur. They're not even going to remember this game several years from now, Dan. So, like, I kind of tend to agree with you in this instinct. And I think the other thing too is one shoe doesn't fit everybody in this thing. You look at CJ Stroud and what he did last year, obviously overly prepared and ready to take that over. I think you have to look at the other 10 guys in the huddle, the entire team as a whole, and then obviously the individual. Like, what system have they been in? What kind of football are they playing? What are we asking them to do? And then go off of that. But this is an interesting year, an interesting class, and I think they are ready to go.
Do you remember a specific time when you realized that Patrick Mahomes was going to be Patrick Mahomes? Whether practice, game, did you have that kind of, where you go home and you tell your wife, uh-oh?
I think the thing, about halfway through the year, he started to make some plays on the scout team, like some of the, the throws that we see on Sundays, no looking like a 20-yard dig route. I mean, as a rookie, like, who's doing that? Who even has the guts to do it and then let alone pull it off? But I think more so than that, and what gets lost with Patrick a lot of times is, like, I mean, Patrick beat me into the building almost every day that entire year. Like, and he didn't do it for a week. He didn't do it for the first month of the season. It was just all year, and incredibly curious. He's just a grinder. Like, a guy loves ball. He's obsessed about it. It is, again, he's doing what he's meant to be doing. And yes, he has the spectacular talent, but, like, more so than that, like, this guy, I got the opportunity to be in camp with them this last training camp. And I sat in meetings again for days. And I hadn't been in that kind of environment with Patrick. I've seen him. I played golf with him over the last few years, but I haven't sat in a meeting with him since his rookie year. And to watch him operate in the meeting room, Dan, I can't tell you how blown away I was, like, leaving there, like, how detailed he was. Like, we went through protections. I mean, this guy's on every aspect of his game. And I think sometimes that gets lost with the wild plays that he makes. And again, how obsessed he is about his craft, being the best quarterback in the NFL. And so I think if there was a thing that entire year, it was also that, like, again, that he beat me in every single morning, right? All the way till the end. The guy just loves football, loves competing. He wants the ball in his hand. He's not afraid of the moment. So I think all those things kind of over the year showed their head. And then certainly when he started the last game against Denver, very, very apparent that he was ready to go.
That's part one of the conversation with Alex Smith yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. Part two is the now Alex Smith, who, if you've seen him in shorts, you go, whew, man. And his leg looks pretty gnarly. And so he discussed that and the comeback from the injury yesterday on Dan Patrick's show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's not, especially if I have shorts on. If I got shorts on, yeah, I get very curious minds coming up to me and inspecting my leg.
Wow. They want.
Well, it's gnarly looking. I mean, I don't blame them. It's much prettier than it used to be, though. It's come a long way, but I don't blame them. Listen, I actually appreciate the questions sometimes.
But
and
your
honesty.
kids don't bring you to show and tell, and
I think my kids are numb to it. They saw it when it was really crazy. So yeah, I think I hope they don't think that like that's just what a broken leg looks like. You know, I think that they think that that's normal. No, I think they're pretty numb to it. It's just Dad's leg at this point. That's how he walks.
Yeah, but if they skin their knees, they can't really complain to you after what you went through.
You know, well, I think they do. You know, that's certainly a part of what we even talk about on the pod is like, I mean, parenting is a team too, right? It's a great big team and we all have different roles in it. And how does that work? And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's things I've gone through. I find myself pulling, you know, Harbaughisms out on my kids occasionally, you know, which is just funny. So,
do you have a Harbaugh story? We got him coming up top of next hour. Is there one?
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, I got plenty. I got Harbaugh stories for days, Dan.
How about one I haven't heard that I can bring back to Jim?
To Jim. All right. Yeah, I mean, I got a few. I mean, first off, like I'll never forget when I first met him. You know, like we were in the building. It was actually right before the lockout was going on. I was getting ready to have my first child. So I'm kind of sneaking in. I'm getting ready to be a free agent, Dan. There's no way that the Niners are going to keep me. And I'm not sure I really want to be back with them either, you know? And so, but meanwhile, they still let me in the building to work out. So I'm coming in the building. I'm kind of sneaking in the ground floor and working out and getting out of there. And Jim comes down one day and I've been doing this for a couple of weeks and I think he maybe caught wind and he catches me down there and he immediately comes up and introduces himself, but he's sizing me up immediately. Like literally not even being very discreet about it, literally sizing me up. I can tell he's like looking at my body, how tall I am. Oh, you're bigger than I thought, like kind of taller than I thought. And then he's like, hey, put your hand up. I'm like, what? So I put my hand up and he puts his hand up next to mine. So we're hand to hand, right? And he's measuring my hand. I mean, I haven't met him. It hasn't been 2 minutes. And so he's looking at my hand. He's like, all right. Like this full inspection. He's like, hey, you want to go play catch? And I was, sure, let's go. So he goes in and he's got this gnarly looking pinky on his throwing hand. So he tapes up his pinky and just Jim and I go out on the practice field at the Niners and we play catch. And we start just normal throwing, right? So like we're 10 yards away and tossing the ball to each other. And after a few, Danny starts like, I can tell he's like humming them at me, right? Like, so it's like, okay. And he's kind of like, come on, bring it on. And so I start humming them back at him, right? Here we are again. Like, I swear it hasn't been 10 minutes since I met the guy and we're playing like pepper, 10 yards apart out on the practice field, just humming balls at each other as hard as we can, kind of who can catch them, who can throw it harder. And he's like, okay. Then we go walk over and we start playing these throwing games at goalposts. And he's like moving me around. And he was obviously a lot younger. I mean, this was a long time ago. He can still throw it. And so we're playing all these throwing games at goalposts and trying to do all these contests. Hey, do this now. See if you can do this. This lasts about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And he's like, all right, okay. We walk in. That's enough. Doesn't say anything. I get no feedback at all on like how this went. I mean, I remember coming home to my wife and I'm like telling her about what happened. And she's like, well, what did you think? I'm like, I have no idea. No idea. Well, luckily, a couple of days later, I go back into workout. Jim pops back down again and says, hey, you want to go play catch again? So this repeated. He and I go play catch for several weeks, just Jim and I playing catch and playing stupid games and pepper out on the field, and all of a sudden this kind of led to like, hey, what do you think about coming back? And it's just the way Jim is. And he's one of a kind and he's all ball. All ball. I say this on the podcast, like Jim, he would tell the team this. He's like, Dan, his life aspirations were to play football as long as he could and then coach football as long as he could and then die. Like that's Jim. That's Jim. And it's real, so.
But you know what? I was wondering about this. I don't know if you'll get the analogy. He's like Ted Lasso. Like he just has kind of corny sayings, he's his own. He's unique. Positivity, all of those things. It just feels like if there's a Ted Lasso in the NFL, it's Jim Harbaugh.
No, there is, and I think it's kind of the one things I think people ask about leadership all the time. What makes a leader, and certainly in the NFL world, where it's a bunch of just alpha dogs, right? Like the biggest, baddest dudes on the planet. But at the core of being a leader, like you got to be authentic, right? You can't BS anybody. And Jim, it's authentic. Like he just loves football. He genuinely, like he is doing what he's meant to do. And as quirky as it is, like I know I always just appreciated the honesty in it. Like this is who he is. It's different. Yeah, but like again, he loves what he's doing. He's grateful for it, and I think that it really sets a tone for the building and the team.
That's is Alex Smith yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. By the way, he's talking about a podcast. He has a new podcast out with, and you'd never put these two guys together, right? If you thought of these two athletes, you know who they are, but you never think you put them together for a podcast. But they have a mutual friend, and it just worked out that way. He's doing a podcast with Shane Battier. It's called Glue Guys. Shane Battier, great player at Duke, really good player in the NBA, bounced from team to team, won some championships. And Alex Smith, wouldn't figure it, but they're both obviously very smart guys, and they're going to do a podcast together, so he's on to promote that. I want to get to the Tyreek Hill thing in a moment. Just saw this, though, on Twitter. Tom Brady and Kevin Burkhardt are calling the Cowboys-Saints game this week, and then in week 3, they're doing the Cowboys and the Ravens. So that's 3 straight weeks for Tom Brady doing Cowboy games. And Cowboy games are instant ratings bonanza. The Cowboys could be playing me and people would watch. And so they're walking this guy hand in hand as easily as they can into this new venture. Now, I don't know how this is going to be all worked out, but with the NFL committee, I forget which committee it is, ownership committee, considering him for 10% ownership of the Raiders, he's not allowed to go to these individual meetings with the coaches and the players, not allowed to watch practice. I guess it doesn't matter. It's just Tom Brady. Now, the league averaged 21 million viewers for all the games in opening weeks. That's a record, and it's a 12% increase over last year. It just keeps going up and up and up. The more games they put on, the more people watch. Doesn't matter how thin they spread it. We had football Thursday. We had football Friday. We had football Sunday. People watched. This is a drug. And whatever you think of the NFL and whatever you think of the television product, you're watching it. People are watching it. 21 million people are watching that, and the NFL in their money grab when they're doing all these separate deals with Peacock and Amazon, and Roger Goodell saying we're trying to find a younger audience. We want the younger audience to find us, as if they're not finding you now. 21 million people are watching. So we have this reaction from Tyreek Hill, as you've probably seen the footage now. It was released on Monday, body cam footage of the traffic stop, which happened on Sunday morning as he was going into the stadium, pushed down on the ground, handcuffed, ultimately released. He did have an 80-yard touchdown catch in their win, but it now has opened up this whole discussion about race and about the way that police treat African Americans. And this was, and I'm going to get to our own reaction here in the studio in just a moment, but this was yesterday, Tyreek Hill appearing on ESPN, talking about what had happened and his feelings now a couple days later.
When the officer came up and knocked on my window, I let my window down, cooperated, gave him my ID, and then I immediately let up my window. And then after that, I let back up my window. And then he came back to the window and was like, let your window down now. Let your window down now. And then I let it down. That's when he said, if you don't let your window down, I'm going to snatch you out the car. I was like, sir, my window is down. Like, what do you want? I'm not trying to cause a scene because, A, if I let my window down, like people walking by, driving by, they're going to notice that it's me and they're going to start taking pictures. And I didn't want to create a scene at all. Like, I just really wanted to get the ticket and then just go on about my way and then just, just have a great Sunday. I guess the officers, they felt like I wasn't doing it on their timing, but I was doing it. But, man, I'm still kind of shell-shocked from it, man. Like, I'm embarrassed. I was shocked, man. Like, it's crazy because it all happened so fast, man. But, like, for me, man, like, it just all happened so fast, and I really couldn't like gather everything that was happening. So it was crazy, you know. And me being a father, me being a husband, and all that, man, I was just putting myself in that situation. Like, hey, I gotta be smart. You know what I'm saying? That's where I wasn't on that kind of energy. So, I'm a good old country boy from South Georgia, man. Like, I'm not a big believer in dividing people. You know, I don't believe in all that, man. I believe in bringing people together, because that's my purpose in life. I do football camps all across the world, man, trying to bring different people together, different kids, different parents, you know, because we in this together, baby. Like, we on this earth together. We got to live together.
All right, that was Tyreek Hill yesterday on CNN in the days after the arrest. One of the officers has been placed on administrative leave, but lawyers for him are seeking immediate reinstatement. Hill has, I believe, asked that he be fired. I am a middle-aged white guy, but I'm fortunate to be joined in the studio by an African-American man who's about the same age as Tyreek Hill, Isaac Kuhn Harris. And I'm interested in your thoughts on what you've seen unfold in the last few days.
My initial thoughts is just that, you know, there still hasn't been enough change when it comes to how an officer stops anybody that's a person of color, whether they're black or Hispanic. So it doesn't surprise me that, you know, doesn't matter how much money you have in the world, they'll still treat you as a hostile, despite it's only just a traffic violation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just kind of sad to see that, especially with Tyreek Hill on the way to a game, and also his teammate as well, Cal's captain, who's also a Walter Payton Man of the Year.
Right.
So it was just kind of disappointing in my end, just seeing that take place.
You've been driving for what, about 10 years?
Just about 10 years.
Was there a conversation that you had with your father or someone that you're close to, like, you know, you are who you are, and given the history of police and black drivers, I mean, was that something that was expressed to you?
Yes, that was very much expressed to me, especially when I was going away for school.
Mm-hmm.
Driving, I went to school out of state, and my first couple years in school, I was in South Carolina, and driving through South Carolina and Georgia with out-of-state tags, with Virginia tags, is like a big, sometimes no, but, you know, you just have to know how you have to talk to the police, especially if you're not from there, so they might take advantage of you.
Right.
Luckily, the one encounter I had, a police officer knew the school that I was at. He knew that I was a student athlete, so he just let me off with the warning, saying, "Oh, you've never been out this way before, have you?" I said, "No, I have not." But I had that definitely long conversation about that, how to act with police, especially going into college.
Yeah, here's a football player. They had to know he was a member of the Dolphins. I mean, it's 3 hours before the game. It's at the game site. He's driving a car that's like $300,000. I mean, not that someone who's not in the NFL couldn't drive that, but they had to have some recognition of him, and things ramped up. Now there's some, you know, I would blame some on what he did, as you know, there's some game, whatever that was going on with the window up or down or whatever. That he could have cooled the situation faster than he did, but for those officers to have ramped it up as quickly as they did, there's just no need for that. And I look at what has happened over the years, and I've known Michael Wilbon a long time. Anytime these stories come up on PTI, he's very eloquent about the way he expresses it. And I remember having a conversation. We had this on the air, I believe, about the time of the George Floyd tragedy. Len Elmore, who has two sons about the same age as my son, in their early 30s. And he said, yeah, you have the conversation with them as soon as they start to drive. And if you're pulled over by an officer, put your hands on the steering wheel. Make sure that they can see them, because God knows what they think. You might have a weapon concealed underneath or whatever. I mean, so your orientation to being a young driver was obviously a lot different than mine. Right.
Yes.
And how did you feel about that when you started to drive as a young person?
I felt that it was unfair initially, because, like, you know, as a naive 15, 16-year-old, and then also when I really got started driving when I was 18, it was just like, why is there a different expectation for us than in comparison to, like, some of my friends that are white?
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of an awkward conversation to have. Like, man, why are you so jumpy when we see the police? Because it's just like when we're driving, because I'm like, you never know what could happen. They could just see, like, oh, my car fits the description.
Right.
Or I fit the description. I'm a tall black male with dreadlocks.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, there's always, I have to think ahead and think uneasy, I just always felt it was, like, kind of unfair.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a bad situation, and I do have some empathy for police. I will tell you that. I mean, they don't know what's coming next.
Rightfully so.
But in a situation like this, then it becomes, kind of mano a mano. There's a lot of machismo that's going on back and forth here, and they've got guns, they've got power, and they're now looking at being shown up by somebody who's got a lot of money. And so I think that's what exacerbated the situation. Sadly, this will pass. Whatever happens with the officers, whether they get fired, reinstated, whatever, things move on, and we just wait for the next one. And that's the really sad part about that. But a really high-profile case, which adds to a lot of ill feelings as we, and it shouldn't be this way with police officers. Police officers, and I'll tell you this, this was a couple of weeks ago. I was walking around in Rio, and I saw a temporary booth set up, and they were Montgomery County police officers recruiting young people to want to be cops. And I said to them, "This is tough, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, it's not easy to find people to do this." So this looks bad on the police officer side, and this looks bad on the other side too. And it's I don't know if there's a solution. Coming up, Orioles preview. We'll be joined by Katie Griggs, who is the president of business operations for the Orioles as they get ready for Fan Appreciation Weekend. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.